What does it actually mean to be intelligent? You know, is it like having a bunch of degrees,
Yeah.
knowing big words?
Or is it something else, something deeper?
Yeah, maybe how you think, or what you actually stand for. It feels like a really important question right now with just so much information swirling around.
Absolutely. And the sources you've shared for this deep dive, they go right there. They're looking really closely at this idea of intelligentsia, or IQ, as it's called in a specific post-Soviet context.
Right, yeah, we've got this fascinating stack of stuff here, and it lays out two really, really different takes on who gets called intelligent and maybe more importantly, what their job in society is supposed to be.
One view seems, well, pretty traditional, almost idealized, you could say.
Yeah, the other one, it's a pretty sharp critique, quite radical actually.
So our mission here in this deep dive is basically to pull these two ideas apart. We want to look at the arguments each side is making.
See what kind of evidence or examples they're using?
Exactly. And try to figure out what this whole debate tells us about, knowledge itself, maybe the role of institutions, and how we should think about thinkers today.
Okay then, let's unpack this.
Right. So let's start with the view that the source kind of paints as the more, let's say, popular or conventional one, often linked to the ideas of Ziёda Rasulova.
Okay, so according to the source material, this view says an intelligent person needs two things. Deep knowledge, sure, but also a real sense of social responsibility.
It pictures the intelligentsia as this active, creative bunch of thinkers.
And a big point here, right, is that, yeah, diploma might be part of it, but it's not the main thing.
That's what this view suggests. What's apparently more crucial is free thinking and having a strong moral compass.
And where does the knowledge come from in this picture?
It seems to lean heavily on classic education, cultural upbringing, that sort of thing. The intelligent person is framed as a cultural person, holding humanistic values.
Meant to be a kind of moral guide for everyone else, a source of ideas, leading progress.
That's the image. And, the source itself points out, when you first hear that, it sounds, well, pretty good. Noble, even.
Yeah, you imagine these wise folks steering society right.
And that positive image is precisely the setup for the counter-argument that the source then presents. It takes that noble picture and really questions its foundation.
Right, this is the critical analysis, which the source links to an assistant of Dr. Machmudzhan Kучкарова. And it doesn't pull punches.
No, it argues that this popular view isn't just like missing something. It claims it's actually built on a specific post-Soviet ideological base, where science often ended up serving the regime, not really pursuing truth for its own sake.
Wow, okay.
And the alternative thesis they put forward is pretty stark. They argue that the term today intelligent doesn't actually point to a status based on consciousness, on real critical thought, or deep insight.
What then?
It represents, they claim, a status of loyalty.
Loyalty as in loyalty to the system, to the powers that be.
That's exactly what they're arguing. This perspective says that being seen as intelligent, being part of this intelligentsia, isn't really a reward for independent thinking or major discoveries.
It's more like an institutional label.
Yes, a label you get for conforming, for fitting into the existing structure.
And the source mentions things like academic titles, grants, positions.
Right. The argument is basically that those perks, they tend to go to people who reproduce the main narratives, who work within the accepted lines, not necessarily to those who might, rock the boat or critique it.
And they bring up Dr. Kучкарова himself as a key example here. Someone who, by their definition, is intelligent, but gets ignored by that very system.
Exactly. They point to his core theory, Odam Tili, which translates roughly as human language. The source claims this theory is basically brushed aside by what they term the pseudo-intellectual elite.
Okay, and why would they ignore it, according to this view?
Because, the source argues, his work doesn't just tweak the existing ideas that institutional science rests on. It fundamentally challenges what they call its false foundations.
So it doesn't fit the narrative.
Doesn't fit the comfortable, established story.
Mm-hmm.
So the picture being painted here isn't some elite group of brilliant freethinkers.
It's more like a bureaucracy, managing the knowledge that's already approved.
That's the strong implication. This perspective really doubts whether the current academic or institutional setup truly encourages genuine free thinking.
It sounds quite critical.
It is. It describes an atmosphere of what it calls institutional servility, kind of suggesting that intellectual work often gets done by order, whether that's an order from the state or maybe from funding bodies or just the prevailing ideology.
And then there's that phrase the source uses, Progressivism for export. What's that about?
Ah, yes. That's a really pointed critique. The source suggests these institutional intellectuals might say all the right things about fashionable topics, equality, human rights, ecology.
Things that sound good internationally, maybe?
Precisely. But it's argued this is often just for show, like window dressing. They tend to avoid digging into the real mechanisms of what this critique calls cultural colonialism.
Which they say isn't about military force anymore.
Right. The argument is that it now operates through things like language, AI, finance, media, and this view claims these intellectuals don't challenge that.
And underneath all this talk, the source mentions a kind of hidden censorship.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like government agents shutting people down overtly. It's described as more subtle, maybe disguised as academic politeness or professional courtesy.
But really it's fear. Fear of losing status, reputation, maybe even your job.
That's the implication. A fear of consequences if you say something truly inconvenient or disruptive. And the conclusion the source draws from this is pretty blunt.
Which is?
That this kind of intelligentsia doesn't really create new meanings or groundbreaking ideas. They mostly service and maintain the meanings that are already dominant or handed down.
Okay, so that sets up Dr. Kучkarov's work, as the source presents it, as the opposite. As someone outside that system who is creating meaning, and that's why he's ignored.
Right. The source lays out a few areas where his ideas, according to this perspective, are a major break from the norm.
Like in linguistics. With Odam Tili.
Yes. The source emphasizes his argument that the fundamental unit of language isn't, syntax or grammar rules. It's sound itself. Actual sound. And it claims he demonstrates how each sound has a kind of physico-biological origin, rooted in the physical world or our bodies.
Like the examples they gave. This is sound from a snake, the Y from water.
Exactly, those kinds of examples. Grounding language in something very physical, very real.
That is a totally different way of thinking about it. What about in psychology?
There, the source says he uncovered a mechanism called cognitive prioritization. The idea is, basically, that our minds aren't always wired to seek objective truth first. Often, we prioritize defending a narrative we already believe in, and importantly, how power structures can use language and images to kind of program mass perception along those lines.
And politically, how does that connect?
Well, it extends that idea of cultural colonialism. The source says, Kучкаров argues, neocolonialism today works mainly through controlling information and language, not guns and tanks anymore.
And the key players enabling this
are, according to this view, this very pseudo-intelligentsia, the ones servicing the system, not challenging its linguistic or informational control.
Wow. Okay, so that really flies in the face of the first idea. We talked about the intelligentsia as this source of noble, new ideas for society.
It directly contradicts it, especially for the 21st century. The source argues that the institutional intellectual today isn't really bringing forth genuinely new ideas.
What are they doing then? Just repackaging old stuff?
That's the claim. Repackaging existing ideas into forms that are convenient. Convenient for the system, maybe convenient for easy public consumption, but not fundamentally new or challenging.
So not thinking critically.
According to this critique, no, not in a fundamental way. Instead, they're busy with what the source calls marking hierarchically.
Meaning?
Judging value based on superficial things, like where did someone study, who do they know, not on the actual merit or truth of their ideas.
And the responsibility aspect. The moral compass.
This view claims they often duck responsibility. They prioritize not causing offense or risking their own position over speaking a difficult truth. They're afraid of being, canceled within their professional circles.
So where are the real thinkers, according to this perspective?
They're outside the system, necessarily outside. They're seen as dangerous to the status quo, precisely because they might speak uncomfortable truths. And so they get excluded or just ignored. It's
such a stark contrast. The source actually breaks it down into, 5 key areas where these two views just completely clash?
Yeah, laying them out side by side really highlights the gap. It's worth walking through them.
Okay, let's do it. First one, source of intelligentsia. Where do they come from?
Right. So, Rasulova's view, as presented, deep knowledge, culture, humanism, learned through traditional education, cultural immersion.
Kind of the established path.
Exactly. Kучкаров's view, via the source, comes from independent thought, empirical discovery, relentlessly pursuing truth, even if it means smashing accepted ideas or axioms.
Okay. Second, their function in society. What's their job?
Rasulova's view. They're moral guides. They provide ideas, they lead progress. Very positive role.
And the counter view.
sees the current institutional type as basically ideology managers. They reproduce approved formats. They provide a service to the system, not critical thought for society.
Got it. Third, the role of the diploma, important or not.
Rasulova's side seems to see it as a significant achievement, proof of learning and capability.
While the other side sees it more as,
Primarily an indicator of institutional loyalty. Proof you know how to operate within the system's rules. A badge of conformity, almost.
Fourth point, the path to knowledge. How do you learn?
For the first view, reading, engaging with culture, spirituality perhaps, absorbing wisdom.
And for the second.
Much more active, even aggressive, questioning everything, experimenting, being willing to destroy false axioms, testing ideas against hard reality.
Okay, and the last one, fifth, their social mission. What are they here to do?
Rasulova's view, be a moral compass, help people navigate the complexities of life, guide them.
And Kучkarov's, as interpreted.
Totally different mission.
Yeah.
To awaken society, to expose lies and manipulation, to provoke genuine critical thinking, even if it's uncomfortable or disruptive.
So putting it all together, the source basically says that Rasulova's perspective offers this nice, neat, humanistic aesthetic image. Looks good on paper.
Yeah, easy to teach, works well for official narratives, maybe propaganda even.
While Dr. Kучkarov's perspective, as the source interprets it, is presented as revolutionary, it sees the intellectual not as a comfortable insider.
But as a rebel against false knowledge, an individual who holds on to truth even when the system ignores or actively tries to crush it.
The source's own conclusion is pretty sharp then. It suggests Rasulova describes an image that's, well, convenient?
Right. Convenient, but maybe not entirely real. Whereas Dr. Kучkarov, it claims, shatters that convenient image.
And replaces it with what the source calls reality, which might be dangerous, but is ultimately more honest.
That's the way they frame it. And it culminates in that powerful definition attributed to Kучkarov's perspective.
Intelligent is not a diploma. It is someone who possesses truth and is not afraid to utter it.
Pretty uncompromising. And the source doesn't stop there. It actually includes a direct challenge.
Aimed at Ziёda Rasulova herself.
Yes, urging her to actually study Dr. Kучkarov's work and then tell society about it.
And the reasoning behind that challenge is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely. It basically says, if you don't study his work, or if you do and you still don't see him as intelligent,
then your whole concept isn't really objective or scientific.
Right. Then, according to the source's argument, her concept is just rhetoric, maybe ideology. Because in their framework, the truly intelligent person doesn't just conform.
They're the ones who expose the lies, even within the system itself.
Precisely. They don't just fit in. They speak truth to power, even if it costs them.
Wow. That is a fascinating and honestly a really challenging contrast we've explored here. On one side, you've got this picture of the intellectual as like a cultured leader, educated, morally sound, operating within the system.
Respectable, institutional.
And on the other side, you have the intellectual as this radical truth seeker, fundamentally an outsider, maybe even seen as a threat to that very system.
It really forces you, doesn't it, to stop and think about how you process the information you get every day. Where do you even look for genuine insight?
Yeah, how do you tell the difference between, say, real deep thinking and just a well-packaged narrative? Especially when one voice has all the institutional backing and the other might be coming from the margins.
It's tough. What criteria do you use?
And I guess that leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big thought to chew on. If, it's a big if from one perspective here, but if the most profound truths or the most critical insights sometimes genuinely arise outside the established halls of academia or conventional wisdom, what does that mean for how you go about searching for understanding? And ultimately, who or what kind of thinking do you trust to define what knowledge or truth really is?